the impossible repair. Marcus Webb had learned 3 important lessons during his 5 years working in the Frontier Engineering Corps. First, never volunteer for anything that sounded easy. Second, always keep a backup power cell in your left pocket. Third, when an alien dignitary summons you to their palace at midnight, someone's day is about to get significantly worse, and that someone is probably you. The transport shuttle hummed beneath him as it descended through the violet atmosphere of Zarathus Prime. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool window, watching the planet's capital city emerge from the clouds like a jewel carved from starlight. Towers of crystalline architecture spiraled upward, catching the light of twin moons and scattering it into rainbow fragments across the sky. The Zarathi had built their civilization on beauty and precision, 2 qualities that made them excellent artists and absolutely terrible at accepting failure. Beside him, Ambassador Chen cleared her throat for the 3rd time in as many minutes. She'd been doing that since they left the orbital station, a nervous habit that told Marcus everything he needed to know about how badly the situation had deteriorated. "They're calling it the Twilight Incident," Chen said, her fingers drumming against her tablet. 3 days ago, during the Festival of Ascending Light, someone sabotaged the ceremonial platform. The Queen's helm fell nearly 40 meters onto pure granite. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And she's all right?" "The Queen wasn't wearing it at the time, thank the stars. But the helm itself." Chen's voice trailed off as she pulled up an image on her tablet. "The Zarathi have been trying to repair it for 72 hours straight. Their best artisans, their most advanced quantum engineers, even the temple priests who claim direct communion with the ancients. Nothing's worked." The image showed what had once been magnificent. The crown of Eternia, as the Zarathi called it, had been forged 3,000 years ago from materials Marcus couldn't even pronounce. It wasn't just a symbol of authority. According to Zarathi belief, the helm contained the quantum-encoded memories and wisdom of every ruler who had ever worn it. 300 generations of knowledge, preserved in crystalline matrices that defied human understanding. Now those matrices lay shattered. The image showed fragments scattered across a velvet cloth, each piece glowing with a faint internal light that flickered like a dying heartbeat. "Why me?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Chin smiled without humor. "Because 6 months ago, you repaired Ambassador Trellix's translation device after he dropped it in a plasma conduit. The device that every Zarathi engineer said was beyond salvage. Trellix told his cousin, who told her sister, who happens to be the Queen's chief of cultural affairs. Word travels fast in royal circles. That was just a matter of rerouting the neural pathways and—" "Marcus." Chen's voice turned serious. "I need you to understand something. This isn't about fixing a broken gadget. The crown of Eternia is sacred to the Zarathi. It's their history, their identity, their connection to ancestors they revere like gods. If you fail, it will be seen as proof that humans are too primitive to understand their culture. If you succeed—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you succeed, you'll have accomplished something no outsider has ever done. The political implications alone could reshape human-Zarathi relations for decades." Marcus looked back out the window as the shuttle began its final approach to the palace. No pressure then. The Palace of Eternal Radiance lived up to its name. Marcus had seen impressive buildings before, the floating gardens of New Terra, the underground cities of Prometheus 4, but nothing had prepared him for this. The palace seemed to grow from the planet itself, its towers formed from massive crystals that pulsed with soft light. As they walked through corridors lined with living artwork, images that shifted and moved within the crystalline walls, Marcus felt like he was traveling through the inside of a dream. Their escort was a tall Zarathi woman named Silvara, whose silver skin caught the light with every movement. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like those of an insect, regarded Marcus with barely concealed skepticism. The Zarathi were humanoid in basic shape, but their crystalline physiology and elegant proportions made them look like living sculptures. Next to them, Marcus felt decidedly lumpy and imprecise. "The Queen awaits in the Chamber of Resonance," Silvara said, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "You will address her as Radiant Majesty, and you will not make direct eye contact unless she grants permission. You will not touch anything without explicit instruction. Is this understood?" "Understood," Marcus replied, adjusting the equipment case on his shoulder. He'd packed everything he thought might be useful, though he had no idea if human tools would even work on Zarathi technology. The Chamber of Resonance was smaller than he'd expected, almost intimate. The walls curved inward like the inside of a geode, their surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. In the center of the room stood a circular platform, and on that platform sat the fragments of the crown of Eternia. Queen Ethria stood beside it, and Marcus forgot every protocol Silvara had just explained. She was tall, even for a Zarathi, her crystalline skin shifting through shades of deep blue and violet. She wore robes that seemed woven from captured starlight, and her hair, if it could be called hair, flowed down her back in strands of pure silver that moved with a life of their own. But it was her eyes that held him. They were ancient and young simultaneously, carrying a weight that made Marcus feel like she could see straight through to his bones. "Radiant Majesty," Ambassador Chin said, bowing deeply. Marcus hurriedly followed suit. "Ambassador Chin." "Engineer Webb." The Queen's voice resonated through the chamber, each word carrying layers of meaning that Marcus felt more than heard. "Thank you for responding so quickly to our request." Request. Marcus appreciated the diplomatic language, even if they all knew he hadn't really had a choice. "I'm honored to help in any way I can, Your Majesty," Marcus said, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "Though I should be honest, I've never worked with Zarathi technology at this level before." "Honesty is appreciated." The Queen moved closer, and Marcus caught the scent of something like ozone and flowers. "Our own artisans have failed." They approached the helm with reverence and tradition, following techniques passed down through centuries. But perhaps tradition is not what the crown needs now. Perhaps it needs someone who sees it differently. She gestured toward the platform, granting him permission to approach. Marcus set down his equipment case and moved closer to the fragments, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging the damage. The helm had shattered along natural fault lines, but the breaks weren't clean. The edges looked almost organic, as if the material had torn rather than cracked. The internal crystalline matrices, the quantum storage units that held the ancestral memories, were dark and lifeless. But here and there, Marcus could see faint pulses of light like neurons firing in a damaged brain. "May I touch it?" he asked. The Queen nodded, and Marcus heard several sharp intakes of breath from the Zarathi observers positioned around the chamber's perimeter. Apparently, even asking was considered bold. Marcus reached out slowly, letting his fingers hover over the largest fragment. He could feel something emanating from it, not heat exactly, but a kind of vibration that made his fingertips tingle. He'd felt something similar when working on Trellix's translation device, a sensation that human instruments couldn't detect but that his nervous system somehow recognized. The moment his skin made contact, the fragment flared with light. The Zarathi gasped. The Queen stepped forward, her multifaceted eyes widening. "Impossible," Silvara whispered. "It has not responded to anyone since the fall." Marcus wasn't listening. The moment he touched the fragment, he understood. The helm wasn't just broken physically, it was traumatized. The quantum matrices weren't damaged, they were scared. The fall had shocked the system so badly that the helm had essentially shut down, retreating into itself like an injured animal. "It's afraid," Marcus said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Afraid?" The Queen knelt beside him, all protocol forgotten. "How can an object be afraid? Because it's not really an object, is it?" Marcus picked up the fragment carefully, cradling it in both palms. The light pulsed stronger, responding to his warmth. "This is living crystal. Not alive the way we are, but not dead either. It's somewhere in between." And when it fell, when those quantum matrices experienced that sudden trauma, they did what any living thing does when hurt. They shut down to protect themselves. He looked up at the Queen, forgetting he wasn't supposed to make eye contact. Her expression was unreadable, those alien eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Your engineers," Marcus continued, "they've been trying to repair it using technical methods. Forcing the matrices to reconnect, applying energy to restart the quantum processes. But you can't force a traumatized system to heal. You have to coax it. You have to make it feel safe again." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Marcus realized he'd just contradicted 3,000 years of Zarathi tradition and basically called their greatest artisans incompetent. He waited for the guards to escort him out, possibly out an airlock. Instead, Queen Ethria smiled. It was a subtle expression, just a slight shift in the crystalline planes of her face, but Marcus felt its warmth like sunlight. "Show me," she said simply. Marcus spent the next 6 hours doing something he'd never done before, teaching a queen to listen to broken technology. He worked slowly, explaining each step not in technical terms but in metaphors. The helm wasn't a machine to be fixed, it was a patient to be healed. Each fragment needed to be handled with care, spoken to with respect, given time to remember what it had been. The Zarathi observers watched in fascinated silence as Marcus used tools they'd never seen, not advanced technology but simple instruments. A tuning fork to test resonance frequencies. A prism to analyze the light patterns within each crystal. Even, bizarrely, a small harmonica that he'd brought because he found the vibrations helped him think. But mostly he used his hands. Human hands, with their imprecise fingers and warm skin, carefully holding each fragment and feeling for the subtle vibrations that indicated life. He hummed while he worked, unconsciously matching his voice to the frequencies he felt, and slowly, so slowly, the fragments began to respond. The Queen never left. She knelt beside him, asking questions, offering observations, and occasionally holding fragments herself when Marcus guided her hands. He taught her to feel the vibrations, to recognize the difference between dormant and dead, to understand that sometimes the most advanced solution was simply patience and presence. As the twin moons reached their apex in the sky beyond the chamber's crystalline ceiling, Marcus carefully positioned the last fragment. The helm lay reassembled on the platform, all its pieces in place but not yet reconnected. The real work was about to begin. "Now," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of humming, "comes the hard part. The matrices need to remember how to link. We need to give them a reason to reconnect, something that reminds them of what they are." "A memory," the Queen said, understanding immediately. "They contain memories, so we give them a memory to reach for." Marcus nodded. "Can you do that? Can you?" "I don't know, project a memory into the helm?" Queen Ethria closed her eyes, her silver hair beginning to glow with soft light. She placed her hands on either side of the reassembled helm and began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Not quite music, not quite speech, but something that existed in the space between. It was the sound of sunlight on water, of wind through crystal canyons, of 3,000 years of history compressed into a single voice. The fragments began to glow. Slowly at first, then brighter, until the entire helm blazed with light that cast rainbow shadows across the chamber walls. Marcus watched in awe as the quantum matrices reactivated, connections forming between fragments like neurons firing in a newly awakened brain. The light patterns became more complex, more organized, until finally they stabilized into a steady, pulsing rhythm. The crown of Eternia was whole again. The Queen opened her eyes, tears of light streaming down her crystalline face. She lifted the helm with trembling hands, and Marcus saw that it wasn't just repaired, it was somehow more than it had been. The quantum coherence was stronger, the internal light brighter, as if the trauma had forced it to rebuild itself better than before. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "You brought back 300 generations." Marcus smiled tiredly. "We did it. I just helped it remember how to heal." The Queen placed the helm upon her head, and the chamber filled with light so brilliant that Marcus had to shield his eyes. When his vision cleared, Queen Ethria stood transformed. The crown of Eternia blazed upon her brow, and her entire form seemed to radiate power and presence. But more than that, Marcus could see relief in her crystalline features. The relief of someone who had been carrying a terrible burden and could finally set it down. She looked at him with those ancient, multifaceted eyes, and spoke words that would change everything. "The crown has chosen you, Marcus Webb. By the laws written in crystal and starlight, you who have healed the Eternia shall stand beside the one who wears it. From this moment forward, you are named consort designate, chosen of the crown, and future bondmate to the throne of Zarathus." In the stunned silence that followed, Marcus Webb realized that his day had indeed gotten significantly worse. But also, somehow, infinitely more interesting. The unwanted coronation. Marcus Webb had experienced several life-altering moments during his 32 years of existence. The day he graduated from the engineering academy. The day he received his assignment to the Frontier Corps. The day his ex-wife told him she was leaving him for a cargo pilot with better prospects. But none of those moments compared to the existential crisis of standing in an alien palace at 3 a.m, being told he was now engaged to a queen he'd met 6 hours ago. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "Could you repeat that last part? Because I think I misheard something about being a consort." Queen Ethria's expression softened, though the crown of Eternia still blazed upon her head like a captive star. "You did not mishear, Marcus Webb. The law is ancient and absolute. Whoever repairs the crown of Eternia when it has been deemed irreparable by our own artisans is recognized as chosen by the ancestors themselves. The crown does not give its trust lightly. If it accepted your healing, then you are worthy to stand beside the throne." Ambassador Chen had gone pale, which was impressive considering her normally steady demeanor. She stepped forward, her diplomatic training clearly fighting against her desire to shout several inappropriate things. Your Majesty, with the deepest respect, Engineer Webb is a human. Surely this law was written with Zarathi citizens in mind. There must be some provision, some exception. There is no exception. The voice came from Silvara, who had moved to stand beside the queen with an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into something sour. The law of the chosen healer was established 3,000 years ago by Queen Varanis the Wise. The wording is explicit. Whosoever restores the crown when all others have failed shall be bound to the throne by blood, crystal, and starlight. It makes no distinction of species, origin, or circumstance. Because 3,000 years ago, you hadn't met any other species, Marcus pointed out, his engineer's mind grasping for logical solutions to an illogical problem. This is clearly a technicality that needs updating. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Queen Ethria's multifaceted eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus acutely aware he'd just insulted millennia of sacred tradition in front of dozens of witnesses. The laws of Zarathus are not technicalities to be updated on convenience, the queen said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline walls resonate. They are the foundation upon which our civilization stands. To dismiss them as outdated is to dismiss the wisdom of 300 generations. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd spent enough time working with alien cultures to recognize when he'd stepped on a cultural landmine. I apologize, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. I'm just trying to understand how this makes sense for anyone involved. The queen's expression shifted, the anger fading into something that looked almost like sympathy. I understand your confusion. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more private setting. Silvara, please escort Ambassador Chen to the guest quarters. Engineer Webb and I need to speak alone. The Zarathi observers filed out reluctantly, their crystalline forms catching the light as they whispered to each other in their harmonic language. Chen shot Marcus a look that clearly said, "Don't make this worse," before following Silvara out of the chamber. Within moments, Marcus found himself alone with a queen who had just announced their engagement to the entire palace staff. Queen Ethria removed the crown of Eternia carefully, setting it on its platform where it continued to glow with renewed life. Without it, she seemed somehow younger, more vulnerable. She gestured to a bench carved from a single piece of violet crystal, and they sat together in uncomfortable silence. I know this is not what you expected when you came here, the queen began, her voice softer now, less formal. Believe me when I say this is not what I expected either. But the law exists for a reason, Marcus Webb, and that reason is more than tradition. I'm listening, Marcus said, because he genuinely wanted to understand. The queen gazed at the crown, her silver hair dimming to a pale glow. The crown of Eternia is not merely a symbol. It is a living record of every decision, every triumph, every failure of 300 queens. When I wear it, I hear their voices. I feel their presence. They guide me when I am uncertain, they challenge me when I am wrong, they remind me that I am part of something larger than myself. She paused, and Marcus saw something flicker across her crystalline features. Pain, perhaps, or fear. 3 days ago when the crown fell, I felt them die. 300 voices, silenced in an instant. I have been ruling alone for 72 hours, Marcus, and the weight of it is crushing me. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd been so focused on his own panic that he hadn't considered what the queen herself must have been experiencing. But the crown is repaired now. You have them back. Yes, thanks to you. She turned to look at him directly, and Marcus saw tears of light gathering in the corners of her multifaceted eyes. You gave me back my ancestors, Marcus Webb. You did what every artisan in my kingdom said was impossible. Do you know why the law exists? It exists because the crown recognizes worth that we ourselves might miss. It recognizes someone who sees beyond our traditions, beyond our limitations. Someone who can bring new perspective to an old throne. Your Majesty. Ethria, she interrupted gently. If we are to be bound by law, you should at least use my name. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. Ethria, I'm honored, truly. But I'm not qualified to be anyone's consort. I'm an engineer. I fix things. I don't do politics, I don't do diplomacy, and I certainly don't do royal ceremonies. I'd be terrible at this. A small smile crossed Ethria's face, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Do you think I was qualified to be queen when my mother died? I was barely past my juvenile phase. I knew nothing of governance, nothing of leadership. But I had the crown, and the crown taught me. It will teach you too if you let it. Even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, Your people would never accept a human consort. I saw how Silvara looked at me. I heard the whispers. They think I'm primitive, unworthy. Some do, Ethria admitted. Some will always think that. But others... She gestured to the crown, still glowing on its platform. Others will see what the crown sees. They will see someone who succeeded where we failed. Someone who brought healing instead of force. Someone who listened instead of commanding. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And between you and me, Marcus Webb, my kingdom needs someone like that right now. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began shrieking through the palace. The crystalline walls flashed red, and Ethria was on her feet instantly, the crown of Eternia back on her head before Marcus could blink. The chamber doors burst open and Silvara rushed in, her silver skin flushed dark with urgency. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Lord Cashin and his faction have barricaded themselves in the council chamber. They're demanding an emergency session to contest the consort designate's appointment. They've gathered support from the traditionalist houses and, she glanced at Marcus with barely concealed disgust. They're calling for a trial of worthiness. Ethria's expression hardened. Of course they are. Cashin has been looking for an excuse to challenge my authority for years. A human consort is exactly the scandal he needs. She turned to Marcus and he saw the queen fully present now, all vulnerability replaced by steel. I apologize, Marcus, but it seems your initiation into Zarathi politics will be rapid and unpleasant. The trial of worthiness is an ancient tradition that allows the nobility to test anyone they believe is unqualified for a position of power. What kind of test? Marcus asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Originally it was combat-based. Single combat against champions chosen by the challenging houses. At Marcus's expression she quickly added, but 3 centuries ago we reformed the system. Now it tests wisdom, not strength. You'll face 3 challenges designed to prove your understanding of Zarathi culture, your ability to think strategically, and your commitment to the throne's welfare. And if I fail? Then the law is voided, you return to your station, and Lord Cashin gets to spend the next decade reminding everyone that the crown's judgment was flawed. Ethria's eyes blazed. Which is exactly what he wants. He doesn't care about you, Marcus. He cares about weakening my authority. Marcus felt anger stirring in his gut, the same anger that had gotten him through years of corporate sabotage and professional betrayal. He'd spent his career being underestimated, being told he wasn't good enough, being passed over for people with better connections and worse skills. He was tired of it. When's this trial happen? He asked. Ethria's smile was fierce and approving. Dawn. 3 hours from now. You should rest. I should prepare, Marcus interrupted. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I need access to your cultural database, your legal codes, anything that might give me an edge. I'll have everything transferred to your quarters, Silvara said grudgingly, and Marcus thought he detected a hint of respect in her tone. Though I should warn you, Lord Cashin has spent decades mastering Zarathi law. He's brilliant and ruthless. Good, Marcus said, surprising himself with his own determination. I work better when the odds are against me. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of crystalline text and historical records. Marcus sat in quarters that were far too elegant for someone like him, surrounded by holographic displays showing everything from ancient legal precedents to cultural customs he'd never heard of. Ambassador Chin brought him coffee, real Earth coffee, smuggled from the orbital station, and sat with him as he worked, occasionally offering insights from her diplomatic experience. You don't have to do this, Chin said as the first light of dawn began filtering through the crystalline walls. We can lodge a formal protest, claim diplomatic immunity, get you out of here before the trial begins. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes, staring at a particularly complex legal passage. And leave Ethria to face this alone? Let Cashin use my retreat as evidence that humans can't be trusted? No. She gave me back something tonight, Chin. She reminded me why I became an engineer in the first place, to solve problems everyone else says are impossible. I'm not walking away from that. Chin smiled, her exhaustion evident but her eyes proud. The Corps is lucky to have you, Marcus. Even if you do keep making my job exponentially more difficult. The trial of worthiness was held in the Grand Hall of Crystal Memory, a space so vast that Marcus couldn't see the ceiling. Thousands of Zarathi had gathered, their crystalline forms creating a sea of shifting light and color. Lord Cashin stood at the center, a tall male Zarathi whose dark blue skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes were sharp and calculating, and his smile was the smile of someone who had already won. Beside Marcus, Queen Ethria stood in full royal regalia, the crown of Eternia blazing upon her head. She hadn't slept, Marcus knew, spending the night marshalling support among the noble houses and preparing for whatever political fallout this trial would create. The trial of worthiness will now begin, Cassian announced, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced authority. Engineer Marcus Webb, you stand accused of insufficient understanding of Zarathi culture, inadequate preparation for the role of consort, and fundamental incompatibility with the throne's requirements. We will test you in 3 domains: cultural knowledge, strategic thinking, and sacrificial commitment. Should you fail any test, the crown's selection will be voided and you will be removed from consideration. Marcus stepped forward, very aware of thousands of alien eyes watching his every move. I accept the terms of the trial. The first test, cultural knowledge. Cassian gestured, and a holographic display materialized between them showing an intricate pattern of crystalline structures. This is the lattice of ancestors, the fundamental pattern that underlies all Zarathi architecture, art, and philosophy. Explain its significance and identify the 3 primary nodes that represent the pillars of our civilization. Marcus studied the pattern carefully. He'd seen it during his research, buried in a cultural text written 800 years ago. The lattice looked chaotic at first glance, but if you knew where to look, 3 points of stability emerged, places where the crystalline structure reinforced itself. The lattice represents the interconnection of past, present, and future, Marcus said, his voice steady. Each line is a generation, each intersection is a moment of decision. The 3 primary nodes are memory, duty, and innovation. Memory, he pointed to the first node, because you believe the past guides the present. Duty, the second node, because individual desires must serve collective well-being. And innovation, the third node, because even ancient civilizations must adapt to survive. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cassian's smile faltered slightly. The second test, strategic thinking. Cassian waved his hand and the display changed, showing a complex political scenario. The northern mining colonies are threatening succession due to resource disputes. The southern agricultural regions refuse to provide food shipments until their representation is increased. The military demands increased funding while the education system faces collapse. You have limited resources and every choice will anger someone. What do you do? Marcus looked at the scenario, recognizing it immediately from his research. This wasn't a hypothetical. It was a real crisis that had faced Queen Varani 700 years ago. Cassian was testing whether Marcus would simply try to please everyone or whether he understood the deeper principle at work. I don't solve it, Marcus said, and the murmur became a roar of confusion. This isn't a problem that can be solved by a consort or even a queen. This is a problem that exists because the people involved have stopped talking to each other. So I don't make a decision, I create a forum. I bring representatives from each group together, not to negotiate with the crown, but to negotiate with each other. I facilitate, I mediate, but I don't dictate. Because the solution they create together will be stronger than any solution I impose. Cassian's expression darkened. You would show weakness. I would show trust, Marcus interrupted, and he saw Queen Ethria's eyes flash with approval. Varani's the Wise didn't solve this crisis by choosing sides. She solved it by teaching her people to choose each other. That's what the historical record says if you read past the official summaries. The crowd's murmur changed tone. Several noble houses were nodding, their crystalline forms brightening with what Marcus hoped was approval. The final test, Cassian said, his voice tight with anger. Sacrificial commitment. The role of consort demands absolute loyalty to the throne, even at personal cost. If the queen's life were threatened and the only way to save her required you to give up your own life, would you do so? And more importantly, his smile turned cruel. How can we trust that a human whose species has known us for barely a generation would value a Zarathi life over his own? The hall fell silent. This was the real test, Marcus realized. Not his knowledge or his strategy, but his fundamental worth as a being. Cassian was asking him to prove he could love someone he just met enough to die for her. Marcus looked at Queen Ethria, at the crown blazing on her head, the crown he'd helped heal. He thought about the tears of light in her eyes when she'd gotten her ancestors back. He thought about her vulnerability when she'd removed the crown and spoken to him not as a queen but as a person carrying an impossible burden. You're asking the wrong question, Marcus said quietly. You're asking if I would die for someone I barely know. But that's not what sacrifice means, Lord Cassian. Sacrifice isn't about death, it's about service. It's about waking up every day and choosing to put someone else's well-being before your own comfort. It's about learning a new culture even when it's hard, about standing beside someone even when you're terrified, about becoming something you never planned to be because it's the right thing to do. He turned to address the entire hall, his voice growing stronger. Would I die for Queen Ethria? Maybe. I hope I'd have that courage if the moment came. But more importantly, would I live for her? Would I spend years learning your language, your customs, your history? Would I face rooms full of people who think I'm unworthy and try to prove them wrong? Would I wake up every morning and ask how I can serve this kingdom better? He paused, meeting Cashin's eyes directly. Yes, I would do all of that. Because that's what sacrifice actually means. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe you're not qualified to test anyone's worthiness. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began the Zarathi gesture of approval, a soft humming that resonated through their crystalline bodies. Another joined, then another, until the entire hall vibrated with the sound. Lord Cashin's face darkened through several shades of blue. This trial is concluded, Queen Ethria said, her voice cutting through the humming like a blade. She stood, the crown of Eternia blazing so brightly that even the Zarathi had to look away. Marcus Webb has demonstrated cultural knowledge, strategic wisdom, and an understanding of sacrifice that exceeds what was required. The crown's choice is validated. The law stands. Marcus Webb is hereby confirmed as consort designate, and the coronation ceremony will proceed as scheduled. The humming grew louder, becoming something like music, like celebration. Cashin stood frozen, his political gambit having failed spectacularly. Marcus felt Ambassador Chen's hand on his shoulder, squeezing with pride and relief. Queen Ethria descended from her throne and walked to Marcus, her movements graceful and deliberate. She took his hands in hers, and Marcus felt the vibration of her crystalline skin against his human flesh, two different kinds of life touching across an impossible distance. Thank you, she said softly for his ears only, for seeing past the test to the truth beneath it. Thank you for trusting the crown's judgment, Marcus replied, even when it chose someone unexpected. 3 days later, Marcus Webb stood in the chamber of eternal binding, wearing ceremonial robes that had been specially woven to accommodate his decidedly non-crystalline physiology. The chamber was smaller than the grand hall, holding only the most important nobles and dignitaries. Ambassador Chen stood witness, her diplomatic mask firmly in place though Marcus could see pride shining in her eyes. Queen Ethria approached, and in her hands she carried something Marcus had never seen before. A second crown, smaller than the crown of Eternia but no less beautiful. It had been forged in the 3 days since the trial, created by a collaboration of Zarathi artisans and human engineers working together to blend two different technological traditions into something new. This is the crown of bridge building, Ethria explained as she placed it upon Marcus's head. It was lighter than he'd expected and warm, and as it settled into place, Marcus felt something activate, a connection forming between his crown and Ethria's, a quantum link that would allow them to share thoughts and feelings across any distance. I can hear you, he thought, and felt Ethria's answering warmth. And I you, her voice echoed in his mind, filled with hope and curiosity and something that might have been the beginning of affection. Welcome to the throne, Marcus Webb. Welcome to a partnership that will change both our peoples. The ceremony continued with rituals Marcus barely understood, but it didn't matter. As he stood beside Queen Ethria, feeling the weight of his new crown and the warmth of her presence in his mind, Marcus realized something profound. He'd spent his career fixing broken things, never imagining he might become part of something unbroken and beautiful. The human engineer and the alien queen, bound by crystal and starlight, ready to build a bridge between two civilizations. It was, Marcus thought, the most interesting engineering project he'd ever attempted. And he couldn't wait to see what they would build together.